Vanessa didn't even wait until we reached the center of the living room before she looked down at my kids' shoes and laughed. "Cheap fits them just fine," she said loudly, lifting her wine glass as if she had just delivered the cleverest joke in the world. The room answered her with laughter. Not polite laughter. Real laughter. The kind that bounced off walls and filled every empty corner, leaving no place to hide. Emma's hand tightened in mine so suddenly that my fingers went numb. Lucas didn't move at all. He just stared at the carpet. Like if he didn't look up, no one could see him. I forced a smile. The kind I had practiced for years, soft, harmless, quiet. The kind that said, "I'm fine," even when I wasn't. My mother stood across the room near the cake table. She didn't say a word. She didn't defend us. She only sighed, the kind of sigh that carried embarrassment instead of sympathy. That hurt more than Vanessa's words. As I shifted my purse higher onto my shoulder, trying to guide the kids deeper into the room, I caught Vanessa glancing at me again. Not at my face. Not at the kids. At my purse. Just a quick flick of her eyes. Then she smiled like nothing had happened. And something inside my chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with humiliation. Something else had started long before this night. I just didn't know it yet. I led Lucas and Emma toward the snack table, keeping my voice soft and steady, pretending nothing had happened. The smell of store-bought frosting filled the air, mixed with the sharp sweetness of soda and plastic decorations. Bright balloons brushed against the ceiling fan, swaying with every movement in the crowded room. No one greeted us. Not really. A few cousins nodded politely, but their conversations never paused long enough to include us. Vanessa remained planted in the center of the room like she owned the place, her designer heels clicking against hardwood floors as she laughed too loudly at her own stories. She looked perfect. Perfect hair. Perfect makeup. Perfect confidence. I tugged at the sleeve of my cardigan, suddenly aware of how worn it looked beneath the bright kitchen lights. I had bought it 3 years ago during a clearance sale and promised myself it would last at least 2 winters. Now it barely survived 4. "Mom," my mother said quietly when I approached her, giving me a brief hug that lasted less than a second. "You could have dressed them nicer tonight." Her voice stayed low, but the sting landed deep. "They're clean," I replied gently. She didn't answer. She just looked away, already searching for someone else to talk to. Emma tugged my sleeve. "Aunt Rachel," she whispered, her voice small and unsure. "Are my shoes bad?" My heart twisted so tightly I could barely breathe. I crouched down beside her, smoothing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "No." "Sweetheart?" I said softly. "They're perfect." Lucas didn't speak. He just bent slightly, adjusting the hem of his pant leg so it covered more of his sneakers. That broke something inside me. I remembered standing in the clearance aisle just weeks earlier, counting wrinkled bills in my hand, calculating whether I could afford 2 pairs instead of 1. I had stood there longer than I wanted to admit, choosing durability over style, comfort over appearance, because food came first. School supplies came first. Safety came first. Vanessa's laughter echoed again across the room as she launched into another story, something about a luxury resort she had visited the month before. "You wouldn't believe the service," she said dramatically. "Private beach access, spa treatments, custom meals worth every penny." People leaned closer to listen. My mother laughed loudly, nodding along as if she had been there herself. I stood near the edge of the room, invisible again. "Some people just don't plan their lives well," one of my relatives muttered behind me, not bothering to lower his voice enough. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I knew exactly who he meant. The cake candles were lit, and everyone gathered around the table. Vanessa stood front and center, hands clasped together as if she were hosting a television show instead of attending a family gathering. Lucas and Emma stood beside me, quiet and still. I watched their faces carefully, the way Emma folded her hands together nervously, the way Lucas avoided looking at anyone. Children notice everything, even when adults pretend they don't. After the cake was cut and plates were passed around, I stepped into the kitchen to catch my breath. The noise from the living room dulled slightly behind the wall, giving me just enough silence to think. That's when the memory hit me. A phone notification. Weeks earlier. Late at night. A bank alert I had barely glanced at before swiping away. I remembered staring at the screen, tired after a long day, telling myself I would check it later. Later never came. Until now. A strange feeling settled in my stomach, cold and heavy. Not panic. Not yet. Just unease. I returned to the living room, carrying 2 paper plates toward the kids. That's when I saw Vanessa watching me again. Her smile stayed fixed, but her eyes moved, sharp, calculating, flicking toward my purse for the second time that night. "You still using that same bank account?" she asked casually as I passed. Her tone sounded light, friendly. Too friendly. "Yeah," I answered slowly. "Why?" "Oh, nothing," she said with a shrug, turning back toward the group. "Just curious." Curious? The word lingered in my mind long after she stopped speaking. Across the room, my mother clapped her hands loudly, drawing everyone's attention. "You know," she said proudly, resting her hand on Vanessa's shoulder. "Vanessa's the one who keeps this family together." Everyone nodded. No one looked at me. I stood there holding 2 plates of cake, feeling like I had been erased from the room entirely. Later, Lucas and Emma sat alone at the edge of the table while other children ran past them, laughing and shouting. No one invited them to join. Lucas leaned closer to me. "Can we go home soon?" he whispered. His voice carried exhaustion, not from the party, but from the feeling of being unwelcome. "Soon," I promised gently. But I didn't move. Leaving early would only confirm what everyone already believed about me, that I didn't belong. As the noise of the party continued around us, my mind drifted back to that email I had ignored weeks earlier. The one with the subject line I never fully opened. Funds disbursement confirmation. At the time, I assumed it was routine paperwork. Nothing urgent. Nothing serious. Now, standing there in a room filled with laughter that didn't include us, I felt that same cold sensation spreading through my chest again. Something wasn't right. Not with the laughter. Not with Vanessa's strange questions. Not with the memory of that bank alert. And for the first time that night, I reached into my purse and wrapped my fingers around my phone, not pulling it out yet, just holding it there, feeling its weight in my palm. Tomorrow morning, I told myself, I would check everything, because deep down, beneath the humiliation and forced smiles, a quiet realization had already begun forming. Tonight wasn't the worst part. It was only the beginning. Lucas was already sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, long before the sun had fully risen. That alone told me he hadn't slept well either. The kitchen felt colder than usual. Even with the heater humming faintly against the wall, pale winter light slipped through the blinds in thin gray lines, stretching across the table where Lucas sat quietly, tracing circles with his finger on the wood. "You're up early," I said softly, forcing warmth into my voice. He didn't look up right away. "Are we going back there again?" he asked. The question came out so quietly I almost missed it. I stopped beside the coffee maker, watching steam rise from the cup in my hand. I had been asking myself the same thing since we left my mother's house the night before. "We'll see," I answered carefully. "Why?" Lucas finally looked at me. His face was calm, but his eyes carried something older than 9 years should ever hold. "I don't like when they laugh at Emma," he said. My chest tightened. "I don't either," I whispered. Emma was still asleep down the hallway. Wrapped in the blanket, she refused to give up even though it had faded from bright purple to dull gray over the years. Lucas shifted in his chair. "Aunt Vanessa asked me something last time," he added. That made me pause. "What did she ask?" He hesitated, as if trying to decide whether the memory mattered. "She asked for my school ID," he said slowly. "Said she wanted to see it." A strange chill ran through me. "When was that?" "A few weeks ago," he answered. "At Grandma's house." I nodded slowly, keeping my voice steady. "That's interesting," I said. "But inside, Something moved, a quiet ripple of unease that refused to settle. I carried my coffee to the table and opened my laptop, the screen lighting up the dim room. My fingers hovered above the keyboard for a moment before I finally clicked into my email inbox. There it was, still sitting near the top, unread. Midwest Educational Grant Office. The subject line made my stomach tighten all over again. Funds disbursement confirmation. I stared at it longer than I should have. 3 weeks ago. That was the date stamped beside the email. The same time I remembered swiping away that bank alert late one night. Too tired to think clearly. I clicked it open. The message loaded slowly, line by line, until the full text filled the screen. Dear Guardian, your authorized funds in the amount of $3. 200 have been successfully released. My breath stopped halfway through my chest. Released. I hadn't released anything. I scrolled down, my fingers suddenly unsteady. Attached below was an authorization form, a digital signature. My name, Rachel Bennett. But it wasn't mine. Not really. I leaned closer to the screen, zooming in until the letters filled the monitor. The shape of the R was wrong, too round, too wide. I always made mine sharp, angled slightly forward. This one curved softly, like someone copying from memory instead of habit. A cold wave rolled down my spine. I pressed my fingers against my lips, trying to steady my breathing. This had to be a mistake, a system error, something technical. But deep down, I already knew better. A memory surfaced without warning. Vanessa standing in my kitchen weeks earlier, smiling warmly as she leaned against the counter. You should let me help with paperwork sometimes, she had said. You're always drowning in responsibilities. I had laughed then, tired, grateful, trusting. She handed me a document and pointed to the bottom. Just sign here, she told me. It's routine. I didn't read it carefully. I signed because she was family, because I trusted her, because I was exhausted. Now that moment replayed in my mind with terrifying clarity. The pen she handed me, the way she stood close, watching carefully, the way she folded the paper immediately after I signed it. My stomach twisted. I grabbed my phone before I could talk myself out of it and dialed the number listed at the bottom of the email. The ringing felt louder than it should have. A woman answered on the third ring. Midwest Educational Grant Office. How can I help you? My name is Rachel Bennett, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I received a confirmation email about funds being released. But I never approved anything. There was a pause as she typed. I see your account, she replied calmly. Yes? The funds were released 3 weeks ago with verified authorization. My pulse quickened. Verified how? I asked. Identity confirmation was completed through standard protocol, she explained. Guardian ID verification and phone confirmation. Phone confirmation. What number was used? I asked quietly. She read the number aloud. I didn't need to write it down. I recognized it instantly. My mother's number. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too quiet. I didn't authorize anything, I said, my voice barely steady. The woman on the line spoke gently. If you believe this was unauthorized, we can begin a review process. We can also provide IP access records tied to the transaction. Yes, I said quickly. Please send those. Of course, she replied. You should receive them shortly. The call ended, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. Lucas had moved to the sink, rinsing his cereal bowl. He didn't look at me, didn't ask questions, just stayed quiet, like he understood something serious was unfolding. I returned to the laptop and noticed another attachment I hadn't opened yet. Transaction authorization form. My fingers trembled slightly as I clicked it open. The document appeared on screen, typed. Clean, official, my name printed clearly. My signature stamped below, and yet every detail felt wrong. The loops too wide. The strokes too careful. Like someone tracing identity instead of owning it. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Who had access to my paperwork? Vanessa had. My mother had... A memory surfaced, one I had dismissed months earlier. My mother insisting that important mail should be delivered to her house instead of mine. Safer there, she had said. At the time, it sounded helpful. Now, it sounded calculated. My inbox chimed softly. A new message had arrived. From the grant office. IP access records attached. I stared at the notification, my finger hovering over the trackpad. Opening that file would mean crossing a line I could never uncross. Because once I knew where that authorization came from, there would be no more guessing. No more pretending. No more trust to protect. I clicked the file open, and as the loading bar crawled across the screen, one thought settled deep in my chest, heavy and impossible to ignore. If that address led where I feared, nothing in my family would ever be the same again. The address on the screen didn't change, no matter how many times I blinked. Margaret Bennett Residence, Des Moines, Iowa? My mother's house. I leaned closer to the laptop, as if distance could somehow distort what I was seeing. I read the line again, then again. Each time, the letters stayed the same, cold, precise, unforgiving. No, I whispered under my breath. That can't be right. But the longer I stared, the heavier the truth settled inside my chest. I pressed my fingers against my temples, trying to slow the pounding behind my eyes. My mother's house. That was the location listed under the IP access log, the exact place where the authorization had been processed. A memory surfaced slowly, like something rising from deep water. Months earlier, I had been waiting on a piece of mail, something important from the bank. I remembered calling my mother, asking if anything had arrived at her house. She had paused before answering. "Oh, yes," she had said finally. "It came yesterday. I forgot to mention it." At the time, I had brushed off the hesitation. Now, that small pause echoed louder than it should. I pushed myself upright and logged into my bank account. My hands moved faster this time, driven by something stronger than fear. Determination. The transaction history loaded onto the screen. Line after line of numbers stretching back through months of careful budgeting and tight planning. At first, everything looked normal. Rent payments, utility bills, school lunch fees, groceries. Then I saw it. A withdrawal. Not large enough to raise immediate panic, but unfamiliar. I leaned closer and clicked the details. The date aligned with a week I barely remembered, buried beneath work schedules and school activities. My stomach tightened. I scrolled further. Another withdrawal. Smaller. Then another. And another. They weren't grouped together. They were spaced apart, hidden carefully between legitimate expenses, quiet enough to avoid suspicion, steady enough to cause damage over time. My breathing slowed into something sharp and controlled. This wasn't one mistake. This was a pattern. I grabbed a notepad from the drawer and began writing down each suspicious amount, listing dates in a tight column. The pen scratched against paper, the sound louder than usual in the quiet kitchen. One date caught my attention. I froze. That was the same afternoon Vanessa had visited my house unexpectedly. She had arrived smiling, carrying coffee and pastries like she was doing me a favor. "You look exhausted," she had said, stepping inside before I could answer. "Let me help with some of your paperwork." The memory sharpened into focus. She handed me a document, something about school forms. She had claimed. I remembered standing near the kitchen counter, Lucas doing homework nearby, Emma coloring quietly at the table. "You trust me, right?" Vanessa had asked casually. I had laughed. Of course I trusted her. She placed the paper in front of me and pointed to the signature line. "Just sign here," she had said. I didn't read the entire page. Didn't question the details. Didn't imagine that moment would follow me months later like a shadow. Now, sitting at my kitchen table, I stared at the date on the page in front of me. That signature had not been routine. It had been a trap. My grip tightened around the pen until my fingers hurt. A new memory surfaced, smaller, quieter, but just as unsettling. Vanessa insisting I use her pen instead of mine. "I like how smooth this one writes," she had said, laughing softly. At the time, it meant nothing. Now, it felt deliberate. I forced myself to keep going. There was more to uncover. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the wall across from me, letting my thoughts drift toward recent months. Vanessa's behavior, her spending, the way she carried herself lately. She had complained constantly about money. "I can barely keep up with bills," she had said during one family dinner, shaking her head dramatically. Everything costs too much these days. And yet, within weeks of those complaints, she had appeared with a new dining table, polished wood, far nicer than anything she owned before. Then came the handbag. Large, expensive, impossible to ignore. And recently, I remembered her bragging about replacing all 4 tires on her car. At the time, I admired her confidence. Now, it felt suspicious. How could someone drowning in debt afford luxuries so easily? I opened my phone and scrolled through old family photos stored in our shared group chat. Months of images blurred past. Birthdays. Holidays. Ordinary gatherings. Then one photo made me stop. It showed my mother's kitchen. Taken during a Sunday dinner, people were laughing in the foreground. But my attention shifted to the background. On the far counter, just behind the fruit bowl, sat a stack of unopened mail. I zoomed in. The image became grainy, but clear enough. White envelopes. Official looking. One logo caught my eye, a bank insignia I recognized instantly. My breath caught. That stack hadn't belonged to my mother. It belonged to Vanessa. I returned to my bank records and scrolled deeper into the history. Late-night withdrawals appeared scattered across different dates, times when I knew I had been asleep, unaware of anything happening beyond my bedroom door. Someone had accessed my account during hours I never used it. Someone who knew my information. Someone with access to my documents. I added the totals together slowly. Each amount seemed small on its own, harmless, almost forgettable. But together, they formed something far worse. More than $3. 200. Much more. A slow drain. Careful. Planned. Intentional. I set the pen down and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. It was systematic. And suddenly, Lucas's voice broke through my thoughts. "Are we going to Grandma's this weekend?" he asked from the living room. I turned toward him. He stood near the doorway, watching me carefully. There was curiosity in his eyes and something else. Concern. "I don't know yet," I answered quietly. He nodded once, then walked away. I watched him disappear down the hallway, feeling the weight of responsibility settle even deeper into my chest. Whatever came next wouldn't just affect me. It would affect them. I returned to the laptop just as another notification appeared on the screen. A new message from the grant office. Additional verification data attached. My fingers moved slowly as I opened it. Inside the document, a new detail appeared. Device type used for authorization. Tablet. A familiar kind. My stomach twisted again. My mother owned a tablet, one she used constantly, keeping it beside her wherever she went. The realization settled into place with frightening clarity. This wasn't one person acting alone. This was access. Opportunity. Coordination. I closed the laptop gently and gathered the printed pages into a neat stack. For the first time, I didn't feel confused. I felt focused. If this had happened once, it might have been a mistake. But this was a pattern. And patterns didn't lie. I spread the papers across my bedroom desk until there was barely any wood left showing beneath them. Bank statements, printed emails, transaction logs. Every line I had gathered over the last few days now lay in front of me like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. Lucas and Emma sat on the floor nearby, working on homework, their quiet voices blending into the background. The sound should have been comforting, but instead it reminded me what was at stake. I picked up a red pen and circled another transaction. Late Tuesday afternoon. That was the time I had been sitting in the school office. answering phones while the front doors buzzed with parents arriving for pickup. There was no way I could have authorized anything at that hour. Impossible. I circled the time harder, pressing until the pen nearly tore the paper. One by one, I marked each suspicious withdrawal. The red ink stood out sharply against the white page, forming a pattern that grew uglier with every circle. This wasn't confusion anymore. This was evidence. I leaned back slightly and exhaled slowly, trying to steady the tightness in my chest. For years, whenever problems surfaced, I handled them quietly. I fixed what I could and ignored what I couldn't. But this wasn't something that could be ignored. Not when it involved my children's future. I turned toward the laptop and opened a new tab. My fingers hesitated above the keyboard. Free Legal Aid Financial Fraud, Iowa. The words looked too serious once they appeared on the screen. Too official. Too final. I pressed enter anyway. Several listings filled the page: law offices, government resources, community programs. Most looked intimidating, full of legal language that made my stomach twist. Then one listing caught my attention. Community Legal Support Center, Financial Abuse Division. The words financial abuse felt heavier than fraud. Abuse meant harm, intent, damage. My finger hovered above the mouse before I finally clicked. A phone number appeared at the top of the page. I stared at it longer than necessary, feeling my pulse quicken. Making this call meant crossing a line I couldn't undo. But staying silent meant letting it continue. I picked up my phone and dialed. The ringing felt endless. Finally, a calm voice answered. Community Legal Support Center. How can I help you? My name is Rachel Bennett, I said, my voice quieter than I expected. I think someone used my identity to withdraw money from an education account. There was a pause, followed by the sound of typing. I'm going to transfer you to one of our advisors, the receptionist said gently. The line clicked, and another voice came through, deeper, steady, practiced. This is Daniel Carter, volunteer advisor. Can you tell me what happened? I swallowed, forcing myself to speak clearly. I explained the email, the forged signature, the withdrawals, the IP address tied to my mother's house. Silence followed for a moment. Then he asked the question I had been dreading. Did anyone in your family have access to your documents? The word family hit harder than I expected. Yes, I admitted quietly. My sister and my mother. Another pause. What you're describing, he said carefully, could qualify as identity misuse and financial fraud, even if it involves relatives. Criminal. The word echoed in my mind before he even said it. If multiple transactions occurred, he continued, that strengthens your case significantly. Case. Not problem. Not misunderstanding. Case. I ended the call with careful instructions written across a yellow notepad. Document everything. Gather proof. Take photos. When I arrived at my mother's house later that afternoon to pick up the kids, the front door stood unlocked like always. Inside, the kitchen felt too quiet. No television. No chatter. No movement. I stepped further in, calling softly. Mom. No answer. Vanessa's car wasn't outside either. I moved toward the kitchen counter to wait, setting my purse down carefully. That's when I saw it. A stack of unopened mail resting near the fruit bowl. One envelope stuck out slightly, its bold lettering catching my attention. Final notice, payment due. Addressed to Vanessa. My heart skipped once. Just once. Then began pounding harder. I told myself not to touch it. Not to look. Not to interfere. But my hand moved anyway. I lifted the top envelope carefully, sliding it just enough to read the details. Late payment warning. Outstanding balance. The date printed on the corner made my stomach twist. It matched one of the withdrawals I had circled earlier that morning. I slid the envelope back exactly where it had been and noticed more letters beneath it. Same company. Same warning notices. More overdue balances. Vanessa wasn't just struggling. She was drowning. And desperation made people dangerous. I forced myself to place the stack back precisely the way I found it. aligning the edges carefully so nothing looked disturbed. My heart pounded louder when I heard the front door open. Footsteps approached. I grabbed a glass from the counter and turned toward the sink, pretending to fill it with water. My mother entered the kitchen, her expression unreadable. "You look tired," she said slowly. Her eyes lingered on me longer than usual. "Everything okay?" Her tone sounded casual, but something underneath it felt sharp, like she was testing me. "I'm fine," I answered evenly. She didn't move right away, just stood there watching, measuring, waiting. Finally, she turned away and began sorting through the mail stack. My pulse thudded in my ears as I watched her hands move across those envelopes. Later that night, back at home, I sat at the kitchen table again with my phone in hand. Daniel's voice echoed in my memory. "Document everything. File a preliminary report. Before they realize you suspect anything." I opened the reporting form online. Each question felt heavier than the last. Name. Account details. Transaction amounts. Possible suspect. My hands trembled slightly as I typed. I reached the final page. Submit report. The blinking cursor waited for my answer. I stared at the screen, thinking about family dinners, birthday parties, childhood memories that suddenly felt fragile. If I pressed submit, there would be no going back. No quiet fixes. No pretending. Only truth. I closed my eyes briefly, hearing Emma's laughter from the living room and Lucas's steady voice explaining something to her. Their future depended on this moment. I opened my eyes again and pressed submit. The confirmation message appeared instantly. Report successfully filed. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen as silence filled the room. From that moment on, this was no longer just a family problem. It was a legal one. And somewhere, sooner or later, someone would start asking questions. My phone vibrated in the middle of the school office just as I finished filing attendance reports for the afternoon. I glanced down at the screen, expecting a reminder or another routine notification. Instead, I saw my mother's name. That alone made my stomach tighten. She almost never called during work hours unless something was wrong. I stared at the screen for a second longer than I should have, feeling that same cold unease creeping back into my chest. Around me, the office hummed with quiet activity, phones ringing, printers clicking, teachers passing by with stacks of papers. I answered. "Hi. Mom?" There was no greeting on her end. "Have you been digging through my mail?" Her voice cut through the line like broken glass. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. "What?" I said finally, forcing calm into my voice. "You heard me," she snapped. "Have you been snooping around my kitchen?" My heart began to pound harder. "No," I answered carefully. "Why would I do that?" There was a pause, short, tense, heavy with something I couldn't name. "You've been acting strange," she said. "Quiet. Distracted." I swallowed. "I've been busy," I replied. "You always imagine problems that don't exist." She continued sharply. "You worry too much. That's always been your problem." The words landed exactly where she intended them to. Gaslighting. That familiar pattern of making me doubt myself. My instincts. My memory. "I'm not imagining anything," I said quietly. Another silence followed. Then her tone shifted slightly. Softer but still edged with suspicion. "Just stay out of things that don't concern you," she muttered. The call ended before I could respond. I lowered the phone slowly, staring at the blank screen while the office noise continued around me. My pulse hadn't slowed yet. I had never told her about the report. Not a word. So how did she sense something? That thought stayed with me long after the workday ended. By the time I arrived home that evening, the sky had already darkened into deep blue. Lucas and Emma sat at the kitchen table finishing homework, their pencils scratching softly against paper. I had just set my purse down when the doorbell rang. Sharp. Unexpected. I froze for a second before walking toward the door. When I opened it, Vanessa stood on the porch, smiling like nothing had ever been wrong between us. That alone made my chest tighten. Surprise? she said brightly, holding up a shopping bag. Her tone was warm, too warm. What are you doing here? I asked carefully. I was out running errands and saw these, she said, stepping inside before I invited her. Thought of the kids. She handed me the bag. Inside were 2 pairs of shoes. Brand new. Bright colors. Clean laces. Expensive labels. Emma gasped the moment she saw them. They're beautiful, she whispered. Lucas stayed silent. Watching. Always watching. I thought they deserved better, Vanessa said lightly, her smile lingering just a little too long. Better. The word echoed in my mind, dragging me back to the laughter from the party. Thank you, I said carefully. Don't worry about paying me back, she added quickly. It's nothing. Nothing. The receipt inside the bag told a different story. The total printed at the bottom made my eyebrows tighten slightly. She had spent far more than necessary. Why? Emma slipped one shoe onto her foot, spinning slightly as she admired the shine. Lucas leaned closer to me. Why is she being nice now? He whispered under his breath. I didn't answer. Because I didn't know, or maybe I did, but didn't want to admit it yet. Later that evening, I drove the kids to my mother's house so they could finish a school project with supplies I had left there earlier in the week. The front door stood slightly open. Lights glowed inside. Voices drifted softly through the hallway. I stepped quietly toward the kitchen. That's when I heard it. She doesn't know yet, Vanessa whispered. My body went completely still. My mother's voice answered. Lower but urgent. Just act normal. Don't give her a reason to suspect anything. The words landed like stones in my chest. They knew, or at least feared something. I stepped back slowly, careful not to make a sound. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain they could hear it. Just as I turned toward the hallway, my mother's voice rang out suddenly. Rachel. I froze. Yes, I answered, forcing steadiness into my voice. She stepped into view, her eyes scanning my face. You're early, she said. I finished work ahead of schedule, I replied. Vanessa appeared behind her, her smile tight and unnatural. Everything okay? My mother asked. Too casual. Too rehearsed. Fine, I said, but inside, something had shifted permanently. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I opened my laptop again. A new email waited in my inbox. From the legal advisor. Preliminary report accepted. Case assigned to investigator. The words felt heavier than anything I had read before. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. Someone official was now looking at the same evidence I had gathered. Another notification appeared moments later. Family group chat. Vanessa had posted a message. Don't forget dinner Saturday. She wrote, Everyone should come. It's been too long since we were all together. Everyone. That word felt intentional. Calculated. She tagged my name directly beneath the message. You and the kids better be there. Better be there. Like attendance wasn't optional. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen. They were gathering people, creating an audience, strengthening appearances, trying to stay in control. But something else happened later that night. Something I didn't expect. Just as I turned off the kitchen light and headed toward the hallway, my phone buzzed softly in my hand. A text message. From an unknown number. No name. No introduction. Just one sentence. You should stop asking questions. My fingers tightened around the phone. Cold fear spread through my chest, sharper than anything I had felt before. I read the message again. Then again. Still the same words. Still the same warning. I checked the number carefully. Unfamiliar? Untraceable. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Someone was watching, or at least pretending to. But instead of shrinking, something else began forming beneath the fear. Determination. If they were trying to scare me, it meant I was getting close. And that meant I couldn't stop now. The morning light felt colder than usual as it spilled across my kitchen table, touching the thick stack of papers laid out in front of me. I sat alone, fingers resting on the edge of the manila folder that had grown heavier with every passing day. Inside it were the pieces of a truth I never wanted to hold: bank records, printed emails, transaction logs, photographs of overdue notices, proof. Enough proof to change everything. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater. Lucas and Emma were still asleep, their bedroom door slightly open at the end of the hallway. That small detail gave me a strange sense of calm, the kind that comes just before something irreversible. I opened the folder again, flipping through the pages one at a time. Withdrawal dates, signature comparisons, IP logs. Each page told the same story in a different way, a careful, steady theft hidden beneath routine transactions. My phone rang suddenly, breaking the silence. Unknown number. My pulse jumped before I answered. "Hello? Miss Bennett?" a steady voice asked. "Yes." "This is Officer Grant Miller from the Des Moines Financial Crimes Unit. I've been assigned to review your report." The words settled into my chest slowly. Assigned. Official. Real. "Yes," I replied quietly. "We've reviewed the preliminary evidence you submitted," he continued. "There are strong indicators of financial fraud. Your documentation was thorough." I exhaled slowly, tension loosening just enough to let air move freely again. "What happens now?" I asked. "We proceed carefully," he said. "Situations involving family members can become unpredictable. The best outcome comes when evidence is presented in a setting where all involved parties are present. A gathering." My mind immediately went to Vanessa's message. "Saturday dinner. Everyone should come." "When is the next time your family will be together?" he asked. "Saturday night," I answered. There was a pause. "That could be an effective opportunity," he said. "If evidence is presented publicly, witnesses can verify reactions and statements." Witnesses. The word made my chest tighten. I pictured my mother's face, Vanessa's voice, the laughter from that first night. "Will officers be there?" I asked quietly. "Yes," he replied, "but only after initial presentation. We will remain nearby until needed." Nearby. Waiting. The call ended, leaving behind a silence heavier than before. I stayed seated at the table for several minutes, staring at the folder without touching it. This wasn't just preparation anymore. This was strategy. I walked down the hallway and paused outside the children's bedroom. Lucas lay curled beneath his blanket, one arm draped protectively across Emma's shoulder. Their quiet breathing filled the room with a steady rhythm that calmed my racing thoughts. For a moment, fear returned. What if this broke the family completely? What if the confrontation turned violent? What if everything collapsed in ways I couldn't predict? I stepped back quietly and returned to the kitchen. Fear didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling me. I opened the folder again and began organizing each section carefully. Withdrawal history went first. Then signature comparisons. Device logs followed. Debt notices last. I placed small sticky notes along the edges, marking the most important pages, the ones that would speak loudest when words failed. Every detail mattered now. Every number. Every date. Every signature. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a new notification. Family group message. Vanessa again. "Reminder, dinner Saturday," she wrote. "Don't forget. It's important that everyone shows up." Important. The word felt deliberate. A second message followed seconds later. She tagged my name directly. "You and the kids better be there." I stared at the screen, a strange calm settling into my chest. She wanted witnesses. So did I. Lucas appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "You look worried," he said quietly. I forced a gentle smile. "Just thinking," I replied. He stepped closer, watching me carefully. "Is something bad going to happen?" The question landed heavier than he realized. I crouched slightly so our eyes were level. "No," I said softly. "Something important is going to happen." Emma wandered into the kitchen moments later, still wrapped in her blanket. "Are we going to Grandma's again?" she asked. "Yes." I answered. But this time, the word didn't feel weak. It felt like preparation. That evening, my phone rang again. Officer Miller's number appeared on the screen. I answered immediately. "We've confirmed details from your submission," he said. "We will coordinate timing with you. Remain calm during the presentation and allow them to respond naturally." Naturally. That word carried weight. "If they react defensively," he continued, "it strengthens the case." My grip tightened around the phone. "I understand," I said. After the call ended, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. For a long moment, I said nothing. Just breathed. Slow. Steady. I picked up the folder and held it against my chest. Imagining the scene ahead, Vanessa's voice rising, my mother shouting, relatives whispering. Anger threatened to surface, but I pushed it back. Anger would destroy control. Control would win. Later that night, after the children were asleep, I sat alone in the living room. The lamp cast long shadows across the walls, turning ordinary furniture into unfamiliar shapes. The folder rested beside me on the couch, silent, waiting. My phone buzzed again. Same unknown number, the one that had sent the earlier warning. I opened the message slowly. "You still have time to stop." My heart skipped once, but this time, fear didn't linger. Instead, a strange calm spread through me. Threats meant pressure. Pressure meant exposure. Exposure meant truth was getting closer. Without replying, I deleted the message. Gone. Just like that. For the first time since this began, I felt something shift deep inside me. Power. Not loud, not angry. Quiet. Steady. Certain. I placed the folder into my desk drawer and locked it carefully. Protection. Security. Preparation. Morning came faster than expected. Sunlight filled the kitchen as I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that felt professional but simple, strong without being confrontational. Lucas and Emma watched quietly from the table as I slipped the folder into my handbag. "You're going to be brave today," Lucas said. Not a question. A statement. I smiled softly. "I already am," I answered. I grabbed my keys and stepped outside, locking the door behind me. Cool air brushed against my face as I walked toward the car. Tonight would change everything. By the time it ended, the truth would no longer belong to me alone. The house was already full when we stepped through the front door. Voices overlapped in every direction, louder than usual, bouncing off the walls in a way that felt almost forced. I paused just inside the entryway, holding Emma's hand while Lucas stood close against my side. Too many people. More relatives than I expected. Aunts, cousins, even neighbors I barely recognized filled the living room. The air smelled like baked ham and sweet frosting, mixed with perfume and sharp laughter. Vanessa stood in the center of it all, just like before. Perfect posture, perfect smile, perfect performance. She turned when she saw us, her eyes traveling immediately downward. Not to my face, not to the kids' expressions. To their shoes, a slow smirk spread across her lips. "Well, look who made it," she said loudly. "Still wearing discount shoes." Huh. Laughter followed. Not everyone laughed this time, but enough did. Enough to make Emma squeeze my hand so tightly it hurt. Lucas stood stiff beside me, his shoulders drawn tight. For a split second, anger surged through my chest, hot and sharp, threatening to explode out of control. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, I walked forward slowly, guiding the children into the room. My heartbeat thudded against my ribs, but my breathing stayed steady. Vanessa watched me closely now. Something in my silence unsettled her. That alone gave me strength. I moved toward the long dining table and placed my handbag down carefully. Then I reached inside. The room continued buzzing behind me, but the sound began fading in my ears as I wrapped my fingers around the edge of the folder. The manila edges felt rough against my skin. Solid, real. I pulled it out and placed it flat on the table. The sound it made, paper hitting wood wasn't loud. But it carried. Heads turned. Conversations slowed. My mother noticed immediately. Her expression hardened. "What is that?" she demanded sharply. I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I opened the folder slowly, flipping back the first page. Silence began spreading through the room like a shadow. Vanessa laughed nervously. "What's going on now?" she asked. Another dramatic moment. I lifted my head and looked directly at her. $3,200 didn't disappear, I said calmly. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Oh, please," she said. "You're still stuck on that." "It didn't disappear," I repeated. "It was taken." The word taken hung in the air. Vanessa stopped smiling. Just slightly. Enough to notice. I reached into the folder and pulled out the first set of documents, printed bank statements marked with red circles. "These withdrawals happened over several months," I said, holding the pages up so others could see. "Not once. Repeatedly." Vanessa crossed her arms. "That doesn't prove anything," she snapped. My mother stepped forward quickly. "Stop this right now," she said loudly. "Don't you dare accuse your sister in front of everyone." Her voice echoed through the room. But I didn't stop. I turned another page and held it up. The signature comparison. "My name is here," I said. "But that isn't my signature." Vanessa's face changed. "Not completely. But enough." Color drained slightly from her cheeks. "You signed those papers yourself," she shot back quickly. "Too quickly." "I didn't," I replied calmly. I placed another sheet on the table, the IP address record. "These transactions were authorized from one location," I continued. "Grandma's house?" A sharp gasp came from somewhere behind me. My mother's face twisted with anger. "That means nothing," she shouted. "You're twisting facts to create drama." But I saw it, the hesitation behind her eyes. Vanessa's breathing grew uneven. Her confidence began cracking. "You're making things up," Vanessa snapped. "You always do this, always trying to play the victim." Before I could respond, a loud knock echoed through the front door. The sound cut through the room like thunder. Everyone froze. Every voice stopped. Every movement halted. For a moment, no one spoke. My mother turned slowly toward the door, her steps hesitant now. "What is this?" she muttered under her breath. She opened the door. 2 uniformed officers stood outside. The room went completely silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. "Good evening," one officer said calmly. "We're here to follow up on a reported financial fraud case." Vanessa stepped backward. Just one step. But it was enough to change everything. "What is this?" my mother demanded sharply. "There must be some mistake." The officer stepped inside. "There is no mistake," he replied evenly. His eyes moved across the room before settling on Vanessa. "Ma'am," he said, "we need to speak with you regarding unauthorized financial transactions." Vanessa's face turned pale. Her lips parted slightly. But no words came out. I stood still beside the table, hands resting against the edge of the folder. Steady. Calm. "Certain. You told me it wouldn't matter," Vanessa said suddenly, her voice shaking as she turned toward my mother. The words fell like broken glass. The entire room stiffened. "What are you talking about?" My mother snapped. "You said she'd never check," Vanessa continued, her voice cracking now. "You said it was harmless." Gasps spread across the room. Whispers followed. Low. Uneasy. My mother's face drained of color. "That's not what I said," she protested weakly. But no one looked convinced. The illusion of control had shattered. Relatives shifted uncomfortably, stepping back as tension thickened in the air. Emma pressed herself against my side, wrapping her arms tightly around my waist. Lucas stood still beside her, watching everything unfold with wide, silent eyes. The officer stepped forward again. "Ma'am," he said firmly to Vanessa, "we need you to come with us." Vanessa shook her head once, panic flashing across her face. "No," she whispered. This isn't happening. But it was. My mother collapsed into a nearby chair, covering her face with trembling hands. Voices filled the room again, not laughter this time, but confusion, shock, disbelief. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't celebrate. I simply watched. Watched as years of pretending cracked apart in front of everyone. Watched as the truth finally took its place in the open. The officer guided Vanessa toward the door, her steps unsteady now. My mother sobbed quietly behind me. And as the door opened once more, letting cool night air spill into the room, one realization settled deep into my chest. The truth hadn't just exposed them. It had shattered everything we once pretended to be. The door closed behind the officers with a hollow sound that seemed to echo through every corner of the house. For a few seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. The laughter that had once filled this room was gone, replaced by a silence so thick it felt hard to breathe. Relatives began gathering their coats quietly, avoiding eye contact as they moved toward the exit. A few whispered to each other, their voices low and uncertain, as if speaking too loudly might make everything more real. I stood beside the table, Emma still pressed against my side, her arms wrapped tightly around my waist. Lucas stood slightly in front of us now, his shoulders squared in a way that didn't belong to a child his age. Across the room, my mother remained frozen in the chair. Her hands covered her face, her shoulders shaking slightly as quiet sobs slipped through her fingers. I didn't think it would go this far, she whispered hoarsely. The words carried across the room, fragile and broken. I didn't respond right away. I watched her carefully, searching for something: regret, accountability, truth. Instead, I heard something else hiding beneath her voice. Fear. Fear of consequences. Fear of losing control. I thought she just needed help, my mother continued, lowering her hand slowly. Her eyes were red, her expression hollow. She said she'd pay it back. She promised. Her voice trembled as she spoke. But the explanation felt thin. Too thin. You knew, I said quietly. The words came out steady, not loud, not angry, just certain. She looked up at me, tears clinging to her lashes. I thought it was temporary, she said weakly. I didn't think you'd ever find out. That sentence settled deeper than anything else. Not that it was wrong, not that it was harmful, only that I wasn't supposed to know. She reached toward me, her hand shaking. Rachel, please, she whispered. For a moment, instinct almost took over, that old reflex to comfort, to forgive, to fix things quietly. But I stepped back, not harshly, not dramatically, just enough to create space. You didn't just break trust once, I said calmly. You broke it every time you stayed silent. Her hand dropped slowly back into her lap. Are you cutting me out of your life? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air between us. Emma tightened her grip around my waist. Lucas glanced back at me.
Waiting.
I took a slow breath before answering. No, I said quietly. But things won't be the same. That truth hurt more than anger ever could. We left shortly after. The night air felt cold against my skin as we walked toward the car. Streetlights cast long shadows across the driveway, stretching farther than they should. Inside the car, silence followed us. Lucas buckled his seatbelt carefully. Emma curled against the window, hugging her blanket tightly. For several minutes, no one spoke. Then Emma's small voice broke the silence. Are we safe now? I glanced at her through the rearview mirror. Her eyes were wide, uncertain, searching for reassurance. Yes, I answered softly. We're safe. Lucas leaned his head back against the seat. You were brave tonight, he whispered. The words settled deep inside my chest. Not because they praised me, because they mattered. Days passed slowly after that night. The house felt quieter than usual, as if something heavy had been lifted but left behind an empty space where tension once lived. One morning, a letter arrived in the mail. Official. Stamped. Heavy. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it carefully. Inside were formal documents confirming that charges had been filed against Vanessa. The investigation had uncovered multiple unauthorized transactions, not just the ones I discovered, but additional attempts that never went through, planned withdrawals, future damage that had been waiting to happen. I closed the letter slowly, letting the reality settle. Justice didn't feel loud. It felt quiet, steady, necessary. Another message arrived days later, this time from a relative. I always wondered how she afforded so much. The message read, "I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner." Some relatives reached out. Others stayed silent. The family changed in ways that couldn't be undone. But something else changed too. Me. A week later, I sat inside a small bank office, signing paperwork to open a new protected account, one that only I controlled. Every line I signed, I read carefully. Every detail mattered now. When the final signature dried, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief. Control. Ownership. Protection. No one else would ever have access to our future again. At home that evening, Lucas and Emma ran across the yard, laughter filling the warm afternoon air. Emma spun in circles, showing off her new shoes, while Lucas tied his own laces carefully, concentrating with quiet determination. I sat on the porch with a warm cup of coffee, watching them, watching their freedom, watching their safety. For the first time in months, the sound of their laughter didn't carry tension beneath it, just joy. Simple, honest joy. I thought back to that first night, the laughter, the humiliation, the sting of hearing someone mock my children in front of a room full of family. At the time, it felt unbearable. Now, it felt like a turning point. Not revenge, not victory, survival. Standing up didn't destroy my family. The truth did. And the truth didn't arrive suddenly. It arrived because I stopped ignoring the signs, stopped doubting my instincts, and chose to protect the people who depended on me. Emma ran toward me, breathless. "Did you see that?" she asked excitedly. "I saw," I said, smiling softly. Lucas followed behind her, more reserved but just as proud. "You look happier now," he said quietly. I realized he was right. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was honest. And honesty, even when painful, creates strength that silence never can. I took a slow sip of coffee and looked out across the yard, letting the quiet settle around me. If you've ever been in a room where people laughed at you, if you've ever stayed silent just to keep peace in a family that didn't protect you, if you've ever doubted your own instincts because someone told you that you were imagining things, then you already understand how heavy that silence can feel. And maybe, like me, you've wondered what would happen if you finally chose to stand up, not with anger, not with revenge, but with truth. If this story reminded you of your own strength, or a moment when you had to protect someone you love, I'd really like to hear about it. Share your thoughts. Tell me what you would have done in my place. And if stories like this matter to you, stories about standing up, protecting family, and finding strength when everything feels stacked against you, stay with us. Subscribe, stay connected, and don't miss the next story. Because sometimes, the quietest strength becomes the loudest truth.